Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is withhold, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Maria Clara, so thank you so much for sharing this great idea. Now, let's begin our discussion by looking at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear withhold used means to refuse to give something that is due to or is desired by another. Connected to this first definition, you might hear about organizations, groups, or even individuals withholding support, right? It means they're not giving it. You might hear of people withholding funds, again, refusing to give or contribute. A second way to use the verb withhold means to suppress or hold back an emotion or reaction. Sometimes in literature, characters have been described as withholding tears, right? So they're trying to suppress or hold it back. They're trying not to cry. A third way you might hear the verb withhold used means when an employer deducts tax from an employee's paycheck and sends it directly to the government. This definition, again, as you might tell, is pretty specific when it comes to income taxes. Uh, and so, if you happen to be someone who works in accounting or finances, you might encounter this verb a great deal. For now, you should know that withhold is an irregular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing. That forms withholding. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb are going to require a spelling change. So our O in the second syllable of the word, hold, is going to change to an E. We pronounce the past tense and the participle forms of this verb withheld. Withheld. Okay? And if you've already studied and are familiar with the verb hold, you'll notice the pattern here with our irregular is exactly the same. Now, let's move on. I have one phrasal verb that I think you may encounter, and that is to withhold from. When this phrasal verb gets used, generally, it's being used to mean to not allow someone or something to access something else. An example of this might be that information was withheld from us. So it's saying this information was not shared. We were not permitted to know this particular thing. Now, let's continue to use our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the simple past tense and the simple future. Let's start with the past tense. We use the simple past tense to talk about completed actions that occurred at a known point in the past. Sometimes our sentences will have time signals. That could be a word like yesterday. It could be a specific time or a specific time or date. It could also be a phrase, maybe like 3 years ago, as an example. The nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our pattern will stay the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, you're going to see our subject, and then you're going to see that irregular past tense verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The suit says that Amazon withheld prime delivery in certain underserved communities in Washington, D.C. So, this is a pretty recent news article, again from the United States. There is a group alleging that the large company, Amazon, allowed people to purchase access to their Prime services, but one of those benefits is that you get rather quick or 2-day delivery on things. But that benefit was not accessible to certain people within, I believe it was 2 zip codes in the Washington, D.C. area. So, right, they're not allowing access. Now let's look at a negative simple past tense sentence. To do this, you're going to notice the pattern of having a subject, did not, and then the base verb, right? So we won't have the irregular form of our verb in the negative. Here's another example sentence. His employer didn't withhold enough state taxes, so he had to pay a large tax liability and had to pay interest last year. Okay. So this is describing someone's income tax situation, and it's suggesting, right, the company did not hold back enough and send that to the government. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, you want to start with did, then you're going to have your subject, and then the base verb. Again, notice the only time I'm using the irregular form of that verb is in the affirmative. Here's my last example. Did the country withhold military aid for their allies? So again, it goes back to that first definition. Now, let's move on and look at some sentences in the simple future. Today, we're going to focus on making sentences with will. This is most commonly used when people are making offers and promises. You might see it used when people discuss their plans, but it's a little less common. The nice thing about making sentences with will in the simple future is, again, our pattern stays the same no matter what our subject is. What you'll see here in the affirmative is a subject, you'll see will, and then the base verb. Here's an example. We will withhold treats until everything has been cleaned up. Right? So kind of that idea we're not allowing access to. If you want to make a negative sentence in the simple future with will, start with your subject, use will not, and then the base verb. Here's another example. The investment firm won't withhold less than 10% on required minimum distributions. Again, this goes back to that third definition. What's really about sending tax payments directly to the government. Finally, if you want to make a yes or no question in the simple future, start with will, then you'll have your subject, and then the base verb. Here's my last example. Will the president-elect withhold firefighting funds from California? Okay. Again, something out of the headlines, this idea of not giving support until conditions are met. This is something that is a bit worrisome, I believe, to people, particularly those living in California. Now we'll move on and we'll talk about some words that are related to our verb withhold. The first word we'll discuss is just the noun form of this word, withholding. Okay, so this is the same spelling as our progressive form. This is a many times used as a gerund. This is the refusal to give something that is either due or desired. An example of this. Her parents' withholding of praise affected her self-confidence. Okay, so here someone's talking about how her parents kind of refused to say, you're doing great, or you did this well. And then kind of the result of that refusal to give. Another noun you might encounter is withholding tax. Again, this refers to the money that an employer deducts from an employee's gross wages, and that money is sent or paid directly to a government. In the United States, this can occur at a local level, a state level, and then federal or national level. An example of this in a sentence might be, is that income subject to withholding tax? And then the last noun we'll talk about today is a withholding allowance. Again, this still connects to that third definition of our verb. So a withholding allowance is an exemption that reduces the amount of tax one is paying, and there are various reasons or situations that might account for it. So whether you're married and whether your spouse works, or how much income can have an impact on the amount that is withheld from one's income. So an example of this: he claimed 2 withholding allowances on his W-4. Now, if you've never lived or worked in the United States, that last W-4 might sound a little confusing. It's just the name of a form. It's very common whenever someone gets hired here in the United States. This is something they needs to be completed so an employer knows how much of your income should be withheld or sent directly to the government, so that you will uh, sort of be current and close to your actual tax liability for the year. Thanks again to Maria Clara for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.